Thank you very much for having me today. I'm really happy to be able to share this project. I've been working for just over 2 years now on this project at Evergreen Brickworks.
Clicking?
There we go. And so, if any of you are thinking LGA sounds familiar, it is because we were the architects in the McEwen School at Laurentian University. I wasn't personally involved in the project, but I thought I would start by showing
I'll advance for you. Just point to me.
Sure. Just a couple of slides. So this is the interior, and as I'm sure everyone saw, the cross-laminated timber wing, which I think is especially interesting, went up in about 2 to 3 weeks from the start. And my colleague has told me that the CLT that was used in this building had offset about almost 400 tons of carbon.
Yeah, it's probably not going to work for you here. It's not a PowerPoint. So.
Okay.
Oh, did you get it?
Yeah, I got it. All right. Success. So these are just a couple shots of the interior. If you haven't seen these already, it's a really kind of exciting project and a wonderful use of wood. So the project that I'm going to talk about is the kiln building at the Evergreen Brickworks. And for those of you who don't know the Evergreen Brickworks, if you're looking at this map here of downtown Toronto, downtown is over here. And then up in the Don Valley, up this way, is where the Evergreen Brickworks is located. And so the brickworks itself operated as a brickworks from 1889 to the mid-1980s. And the site built out over time. Quite a number of buildings had built out during those years. And then in the 80s, the site had been abandoned. And so then for the next 30 years, the site had just lay abandoned, became a real hotspot for raves, parties, graffiti, art installations, nature taking over, photographers, urban explorers, and the sort. And so it actually made a really rich history of the site. And so, in 2008, Evergreen came in and repurposed the site, and it's now this really amazing center down in the valley, and it's I think really most well known perhaps in the green building community for its Lee Plaza headquarters building, and as well as for the programming it offers from event venues to really great farmers market to their outdoor skating rink here. And really it's known as a kind of site to connect people and community to ideas about environmental design, city building, and ecology. And so in November of 2016, our office got the call, and the CEO kind of called us up and said, hey, in short, we need to transform the kiln building. We said, cool, great, we're on board with this. And he said to us, we have to go really fast, like really, really fast. They had a grant that had come from the feds that said you had to spend $2.5 million on construction by March 30th. And so as a result, we had to we broke it up into 3 phases. So we were designing one phase while we were permitting another phase, and while we were building a 3rd phase. So we were doing that all simultaneous. On top of that, Evergreen said, we need to use it while we're building this building. And so, we had to plan around how they could continue to host 1,000-person events in the building while we were trying to build it, and do sound checks while you're bolting steel and concrete together. Because of the unique history of the site, we also had to get 2 heritage authorities on site, and it was both the Municipal Heritage Authority and then the Provincial Heritage Authority. And once you got both those on site, then you had to go to the local preservation board and get them approved, then to community council, then to city council, and then only then could we get that first building permit that I had mentioned there. So it was a really kind of crazy process. And then on top of that, the building floods. It's in the Don River floodplain, so it's actively flooding. And in fact, since they've been there since 2008-ish, the 100-year storm has happened twice, and the 50-year storm has happened, I think it was 3 times. And on top of that, let's make it carbon neutral. That was the kind of summary of the first conversation we had, and our response was, yeah, cool, let's do this. This is fantastic. This will be really exciting. in terms of thinking about the carbon neutrality of this building, you can kind of break down our approach into three parts. There's the building systems, which is primarily what I'm going to talk about today, but equally important is the embodied energy of the materials and the process energy. And on those 2 points, as a footnote, the process energy that went into it, Ellis Dawn was the contractor involved, and they have diligently tracked a lot of the, how much fuel is being used on site, how many trucks were coming to site delivering things, where did they come from, and Ellis Dawn is working with Evergreen and some folks at the University of Toronto, including tabulating the embodied footprint of the materials that went into the building to develop an offset program to start to offset those, because they are an equally important part of the equation. But I'm going to focus on the building systems. And so, as we started to think about this campus, when we set out to do this, they said, all right, we have to have a really sustainable campus. That's what we're known for. We have a LEED Platinum building, and the initial conversations were really that LEED was a great standard for a new building on the site in 2008, but in 2016, and the building that we had, the kiln building, is it's this one over here, the largest building on the site, about 55,000 square feet. In our case, it didn't make sense to do a LEED building for a lot of reasons, which you'll see as we go forward. And so we started to think about this as maybe it's not that you have all LEED buildings, but that you're really starting to think about a campus of really ambitious sustainability projects. And so, carbon neutral made sense for our building. A punch window building on the other side of the site with less heritage constraints, maybe that's suited to passive house, and maybe the main building in the middle of the site that heritage seems to be most sensitive about would be best suited for a double skin facade type of system, where the existing brick becomes a trome wall or something like that, and you don't mess with the existing heritage character. And so just to kind of elaborate on what was there when we arrived and some of the heritage constraints, this is the building as we found it. It was abandoned. They hadn't done a lot of work when they first built out the sites in 2008 to it. It was largely left the way it was, and so this is corrugated plastic up here. It's not air sealed. This is just corrugated metal decking with no insulation. There's a million just giant holes like this. The one side of the building, about 200 feet of it was open air, so it's an unconditioned existing building. In the floor, these lines are the old rail tracks for carting the brick throughout the building. This was actually the building that fired the brick after it went through a long assembly line. That floor, the rails are heritage protected, can't do anything to that. The exterior wall, with all the graffiti, because it was abandoned for 30 years, and in fact the kiln building itself was built in 55, so half its life was abandoned, and that is now part of the building's history. So the graffiti is heritage designated, you can't touch that. And then because it's heritage masonry and whatnot, the outside of the building, you also can't touch that. So no insulating the walls. You just got to accept that that's the way it is. The existing roof trusses could bear almost no weight, so we could only put the very slightest amount of insulation on them. And then the conversation becomes, well, how do we make this carbon neutral? And so that's what I'm going to kind of explain here. So this is a bit of the kind of character of what we found there. And so, in truth, I've kind of glossed it over. We had been thinking about this building a little bit with Evergreen and kind of kicking the tires on it slightly before we got the call that the money had come in. And really, a lot of what we talked about was shifting ideas and perceptions about comfort and how that would enable us to think differently about how we approach this building in this context. And so, thinking with the kind of psychometric chart and all the engineering stuff around ASHRAE and how people feel in a space versus what the temperature on the thermostat says, we said, all right, let's look at what we can do with that. And so we looked at systems where for example, the heat and the cooling is delivered through radiant systems. So it may feel colder and be colder on the thermostat, but the heat is being pumped into your feet. And in the summertime, there's a whole range of operable windows, operable skylights, there's gigantic sliding walls that open up, and so you get a cross breeze in the space. So as the air is moving over your skin, coupled with some ceiling fans, you're starting to feel cooler in the summertime than it actually says on the thermostat. And so we started looking at that as an approach, understanding that with the constraints, you were never going to get it to be a Class A conditioned space, and that's not necessarily the thing that's desirable or why it's used, especially in the context that its primary use is really as an event space. People are going to be there for 3 hours having a beer festival, or they're going to be for 2 hours at the farmer's market on the weekend. And so really, you know, set an expectation to kind of bring a sweater with a lot of the mindset. So this is the plan of the space. This blue area is the existing kilns that we largely didn't touch, so this part of the floor was left low. All the other gray part of the floor had been raised. These kilns over here fired the bricks. The other part of the kiln over here was for drying the bricks before they got fired. We have these two event spaces. The larger one on the right side of the screen is for about 1,000, 1,100 people. There was really two new pieces of construction that we added. A lot of the approach was about light touch, you know, don't build more than we need to. And so there's a new washroom that was desperately needed in the space, and a classroom mezzanine that was built out for a number of future functions. And so this diagram, I think, in a nutshell, tells the story of what we did, really. So the one thing to kind of think about in this is there was no heating system in this, there was no conditioning, and so when we initially started talking, well, what's the reduction in energy consumption? There's no reduction. Everything that we do is actually adding, because you know it was zero before. So how do you get less than zero? So we did model, you know, what are two conventional approaches you would do to do this, and we would be, compared to that benchmark, a 97% reduction on the heating and cooling needs on the energy side. From that, and that's only if you crank on the boilers that serve the other building to kind of top up the temperature in the other parts of the year. But generally, in the dead of winter, it'll be about 15 degrees in this space, which is the kind of bring a sweater approach. But all of the heat is coming from a combination of about 260 solar thermal panels that are about to be installed this spring. They tied to a geothermal system, which has about 40 boreholes from about 500 feet deep, and so the heat from the solar panels is pumping into the ground in the summer months and being drawn off in the winter months, and then going back to feed into the floor. There's an immense amount of flooding that happens on the site, so there's a number of strategies in that regard. So firstly, the rainwater is being captured and diverted from reaching the building. It's being used for landscaping. It's also being used to supply to all the toilets the rainwater is. There's a system of swales on the site, so on both sides of the building, which go to a stormwater retention pond, but it's again to kind of intercept the water. We've raised the floor up to, this is the part that you can see with where the floor hasn't been raised, and this part of the floor has been raised, and that got us out of the what we're calling the nuisance floods, so the 5-10 year floods get you out of that, and then and so then, once we raise the floor, the thought is, okay, what to do with the rest of the water? Because as I said, it's a crazy amount of flooding. This is actually a picture of it after it's gone down. This picture over here is our building before we got to it. It was a couple of years ago, that one. But they have a really kind of intensive system of monitoring for floods and a really interesting operational protocol around the idea of just let it flood and really focused on we're going to let it flood, and we're going to get the water cleaned up as fast as possible, and then if it floods on Saturday, on Sunday the wedding that was booked still happens without a hitch because they're a big event venue. And so this, to drive the point home, that's the 100-year storm. It's above your, at your head, and this is the floor system here, the new raised floor. To make this happen, what we did was install this formwork. It's like these plastic kind of upside down, looks like egg cartons, and it offset about 25,000 cubic feet of concrete that we would have had to pour to do that. But you've got a little bit of regular concrete on top of the regular concrete. Dufferin Concrete made this product that when we brought them to the table as part of the integrated design meeting, they said this is a really interesting product, but it's an insulating concrete. It's very low strength, but it gets about R8, and that was really helpful to us because it then allowed us to put the radiant tubing on top of this, and so all the heat is going up into the space as opposed to down into the floor, and in doing so it also helped us sequence things with the trades because this part of the construction was part of that first chunk of work that was on a crazy strict deadline. which we met. We met it on the 28th of March. We finished curing the concrete. On the 30th of March, they had the 1,000-person festival for the Society of Beer Drinking Ladies. That's a true story. And then in the top layer here, we have the radiant tubing, 3 inches of concrete, and we've embedded a number of steel rails to pick up the things that since it was all heritage designated, and we were hiding all the steel rails, we reinterpreted them in the floor, as well as sandblasting the concrete and tinting parts of the concrete to pick up all that character that was there. And so this is another shot of the building there. This part of the floor is existing. It will be left like that, so you can always experience walking through the kilns as they always historically were, aside from the fact that they're not fiber and brick and it's not crazy hot in there. But these are those rails. This on the left is the formwork. It's called cupolas. It's like a cupola that you would see for building, but it creates this kind of arc form that's going in. The tracks there are the steel tracks that are interpreting the ones that you were hiding. The heritage was very took a lot of persuasion to allow us to do this. This is after the concrete was poured in that area. You see the tracks again there. This is the main event space in the building, and so what you're seeing here are those sandblasted tracks. We did a mix of the steel and the sandblasting, and there was an amendment of coordination with all these kind of control joints we had to put in, so that we didn't invest all the time in doing the sandblasting of the tracks, only to cut the control joints in the concrete and have it all get kind of become illegible. This again is, you can see really a direct relationship here between these are the new steel rails we put in, and then as the floor drops, those are the original steel rails at the end of the kiln. And one thing that we did as well, along the one side of the building, there's about 200 feet of open air between that and this really amazing garden space. And so that was all new curtain wall, which is what you see here. And accepting the fact, it kind of became liberating, but accepting the fact that you can't insulate the inside walls, you can't insulate them on the outside, so you've just got solid brick walls, really liberated us from the fact of fussing about thermal bridging. A lot of times that we'd be sitting designing and someone would say, hey, there's going to be a thermal bridge, and then we say, well, all the walls are thermal bridges. 55,000 square foot building that's not insulated, Do we need the most top of the line, aluminum extrusion for the mullion? Like it's not going to make any difference. And so that became quite a kind of liberating moment for us. This is another shot looking from the garden into the building. And one of the amazing things I think that was there before was it was this direct relationship between the garden space and the interior. They just blended one into each other. And so while we had to enclose the building so they could condition it and use it for a longer period of time, and also to prevent the further degradation of the kilns, it also meant that we were creating a barrier that would kind of wreck that. And so this is a bit hard to see, but this section of curtain wall is slides. It's on a roller track. It's about 15 feet by 15 feet. They built a big metal frame, put it on wheels, and then stuck the curtain wall onto it. So in the summertime, every other bay between the garden and the interior of the building, those things all slide open. And so part of that is to drive this idea about the air movement and the cross ventilation. It also means in the evening and overnight they can open those big gigantic doors and allow the cool valley air to drop the temperature of the building onto the slab, and use a lot of the solid masonry and the concrete in the building to act as thermal mass. So again, you can see that here. I didn't say this yet, but a lot of what we were doing in this building, we came into it and said, oh my God, this is the most amazing old building we've ever seen. And the first thought was, all we can do is ruin it. There's nothing we can do this and make this better. It's just going to take away from this amazing character of this space. So there was a real big push amongst the design team to limit what we do. And as much as that was, about kind of respecting the character of the building, it also meant this interesting kind of process where we were eliminating materials and eliminating embodied carbon, eliminating construction that was not necessary. And so what we tried to do was really focus on what was the bare minimum. somewhat in that regard is one of the things we had to build was a washroom. There's no washrooms in the building. It would be really difficult to have a 1,000-person beer festival with no bathrooms. It would be very unpleasant. So we did make a new washroom, and when we started to do a little bit of analysis, first the heritage people said you only have the most limited footprint. You can't build a really big thing. So when we took the box that they gave us and said you're allowed to build here, we found we were getting so few bathrooms when we were doing a male and female washroom because there was a lot of area being taken up in circulation and duplication of things. And so in fact what we've done is built an entirely gender neutral washroom. So there's 22 stalls. Every single one of these is a full height door, full height walls, full height hollow metal door, dead bolted. So you come in, you share a sink together, and then everyone gets their own private soundproof bathroom. In doing so, we were able to get more washrooms, which in turn turned into more occupant load count. And to my knowledge, it's the largest gender neutral washroom in Ontario. We also had to fight with the city about this. They were not initially receptive to that idea. And this corner of it is the washroom there. But this is one of the new spaces that we're building as well. It's really been a part of reusing an existing part of the building. And so what we've done is all we're doing is inserting these glass boxes into the ends of it and creating this gallery space. So this, in fact, is that gallery space. It, I would say, for the most part, represents all the demolition we did in the building. With the exception of a couple minor elements, but these walls, double white veneer ceiling, they're about just over 8 feet tall, but they're 10 meters across, and the masonry is all been removed, and you'd be hard pressed to tell, but these diagonal steel items here, those are new braces that support it. They essentially built the trusses holding up the 2 weights of masonry, and that is to preserve all of this overhead steel equipment here in the middle that Heritage said, you can't take away, and nor would we want to. It's really incredible. Where the space outside of this part of the building is so immense, and you see all the kind of parts of the historic industrial character of it, like this is the most intimate space in the entire building. It is my favorite space in the whole building. It's so intimate and perfect, and this is the kind of entry to it. So here we've cut this new opening into it. The masons who put all this graffiti back together in a way that was both distinct and kind of legible. Where in fact the restoration company had hired a number of really master masons who were recent Syrian refugees who had arrived, and were incredible tradespeople and craftspeople who had done that. This is looking north in this space. We enclosed the plastic gable with a new curtain wall system. We're adding insulated panels on the south side. On the north with this glass for a variety of reasons. And then in here, there's about to be a new classroom mezzanine that's going in. And so this is a shot of that classroom mezzanine. And in service of this idea that the building is the center for future cities, the floor in this mezzanine is cross-laminated timber. It's a cross-laminated timber deck on steel, and it will sandwich itself ever so slightly, like within tolerance of inches, between the top of the historic kiln, which we can't touch, and the underside of the existing steel trusses, which will fly through the space when it's done. So this is a floor plan, so a large classroom, a smaller space, a breakout space. But this is a shot of what the inside of those will look like. Where you get this vaulted ceiling, these amazing daylit spaces, and whereas the rest of the building is this really crazy textured space, you have this kind of white box. It's really supposed to be a blue sky in a studio where they host a lot of events, and workshops, and from doing this work, it's left us with a question of what lessons are learned, what can we tell people about it that they can take away. And the first is that it's hard to think of specific lessons because the building is so one-off. There's not a lot of old brick kiln buildings are being repurposed like this in Ontario, believe it or not. The first, I think, is that the heritage status of a building, it brings both limits and latitude. At first glance, you think, oh, it's heritage designated. It's going to be impossible to do something sustainable with it, but it's not. And so I think in our case, by allowing, by recognizing that we weren't going to be able to insulate the same way, and saying, all right, so how do we think about conditioning in this space? You know, it gave us tremendous amount of latitude to rethink whether or not you need Class A conditioned space in a building of this type. And there's a lot of kind of exemptions through the building code to allow this type of work to happen, like this, recognizing the importance of heritage in our community. And I think that leads to the second one, which is don't overlook the idea of cultivating an attitude of use. And so for us, that was the idea of, you know, bring a sweater to invent, but it also, on the flood protection, in the building, you know, we could have approached it and said, all right, we're going to build a lot of hard infrastructure. We're going to put a ton of sump pits on backups with backup generators and put in all this hard piping. But first, the heritage people weren't going to let us cut up the floor to do that. And then the second part of that was Evergreen over the past 10 years has cultivated this attitude about the building where they're just letting it flood. That's their kind of mantra, let it flood, we're going to pump it out. And so the approach to that was, you know, to make a bunch of pits that they could effectively start to control and corral the water and get their pumps to work. And we just ended up giving them a bunch of holes in the side of the building that are capped with a chunk of insulation in them to allow them to just, you know, pop it open and start blowing the water out the side of the building. And then the third thing is kind of setting ambitious but appropriate goals, because, you know, as I said at the beginning, LEED didn't make sense for this building. There's no way we would ever get a LEED building. There was no way we would get to net zero. But on carbon neutral, that was something that we could work towards, and that was an appropriate goal, and we, you know, prioritized everything in that regard. And in accepting those priorities, it also meant accepting the trade-offs. With the schedule we had, we said, all right, we can get to the goal, we can get the funding, which means we have a project, but in a normal situation, we would do a lot of embodied energy analysis. In this case, we just, in a sense, it was intuitive. And the case in point being the mezzanine, the alternative was concrete and metal pan deck. And in this case, we went for cross-laminated timber, and I think that kind of sums that up. But and I guess the last thing that isn't on here is, and I've said this to the client many times, is, you know, if it was easy, it would have been done before. And I think that's the case with a lot of these ambitious things and pushing buildings and communities to be more green. It's like, if it was easy, we would have done it by now. And you know, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It just means we have to kind of think harder about how we do it sometimes. And so I just want to say thank you for your attention.